They issued the tile at the intake gate on the eastern edge of Vel'drani Station 14. It was a small thing, palm-sized ceramic composite, the color of old bone. Every species logged in the network received one on first entry. Tile carried your classification string across its face in embossed glyphs. 11 digits, 2 separator marks, 1 check character at the end. The intake clerk pressed it into your hand without looking at you, and you pressed it to the reader plate at the gate. And the gate opened, and you walked through. They had been doing this for 412 years. It worked the same way every time. Except mine came back blank. I was the first human to present at a Vel'drani intake gate. Everyone on the convoy behind me knew that. 41 civilian transports idling in Q formation on the approach lane, their repulsor kicking pale dust off the city's landing apron. 314 people. I was 23 years old, and I was the most junior person in the entire Colonial Survey group. Is how I ended up at the front of the line holding a tile I hadn't been sure I was supposed to touch. The clerk, a Vel'drani administrator, shouldered, secondary eyes closed in the bright afternoon light, both primary hands resting on the counter surface, had handed me the tile, without ceremony. It was how they did everything, precisely, without comment. Classification string ran the full width of the tile face in deep-pressed silver-gray glyphs. I couldn't read a word of it, pressed it to the reader plate. The gate stayed shut. The reader plate's status ring, which was supposed to cycle amber to green on a valid tile, cycled amber to amber to amber. Then it stopped cycling altogether and sat solid amber in the afternoon sun while the plate beneath my hand got warm. Clerk looked at the plate. Then the clerk looked at me. The secondary eyes opened, which I later learned meant something genuinely wrong. I lifted the tile off the plate. The glyphs were the same, except for the check character at the end, which had been replaced by 2 short symbols I did not recognize. I showed it to the clerk. The clerk reached out, took the tile, turned it over once, and placed it on a secondary reader beside the gate. That reader also cycled amber and stayed there. The clerk pressed a single key on the desk panel. The entire intake gate locked, not just my lane, all 11 lanes simultaneously, each status ring going solid amber at the same moment. The soft mechanical click of 11 latch bolts running in sequence down the gate wall. Behind me, 314 people who needed to be inside that city before the Vel'drani Ground Authority cleared the approach corridor for freight. Traffic at 1800 hours sat in their transports and waited. I turned back to the clerk. The clerk had the tile in one hand and a printed data strip in the other. The strip was short, 4 lines of Vel'drani notation. I read what I could of the format, which wasn't much, but I could read the header classification, which is a standard cross-species encoding. It said, entry void, species indeterminate. The clerk set the strip on the counter between us, smoothed it once with 2 fingers, and said in standard, the network has no record of your species. A tile cannot be validated for an unclassified biological entity. The gate cannot open. Protocol requires a full species survey before classification can proceed. The survey process takes between 11 and 18 standard days. I looked at the strip. I looked at the tile. I looked at the gate. Behind me, 41 transports. 1800 hours was 3 hours and 14 minutes away. The freight corridor authorization would clear the approach lane automatically at that time. When it did, the lane would be designated active freight only. A colonial convoy with no transit authorization inside the city had no legal standing to remain on an active freight approach. The Vel'drani Ground Authority would reroute them into the secondary holding grid, which was located in the quarantine sector. 3 other unclassified convoys were currently parked, and where the average resolution time for an unclassified colonial transit was, by the survey group's own records, between 6 and 9 weeks. 14 minutes had already passed while the gate sat locked and the plate stayed warm. I put my hand flat on the counter. Run the survey, Nassau, I said. I'm standing right here. The clerk looked at my hand. A species survey requires a designated survey team, a biological sample collection period, a full grid submission for network-wide classification verification. It cannot be initiated at an intake gate. The minimum setup time is 11 days. I understand that, I said. I'm asking you to start it now. I'll wait. You cannot enter the city while the survey is pending. The gate is locked. I know the gate is locked, I said. I'm not asking to enter the city. I'm asking you to begin the survey process, so that the network begins counting its 11 days from right now. The clerk considered this for a long moment. The secondary eyes were still open. That is technically permissible, the clerk said. Then do it, I said. The clerk typed. The intake desk panel ran a sequence I couldn't follow. At the end of it, a new data strip printed, and the clerk placed it beside the first one. This one was longer. At the top, it had a timestamp and a network case number. The survey was open. The gate remains locked, the clerk said. You remain outside the city. The convoy remains in the approach queue. I know, I said. What I didn't say was that I had also just bought 14 minutes. The network's grid, when a new survey case opened, routed a locked query to the regional hub. Before it routed a transit hold notification to the Vel'drani Ground Authority. That was standard protocol. The confirmation query always came back inside 2 minutes. The transit hold notification, which would have frozen the convoy in place, legally, with no route out, ran second in the queue. What the grid did not account for was that a species survey case was a high-priority flag in the network system, and high-priority flags pushed all secondary notifications, including transit hold, into a review queue while the case was being validated. Review queue had a human handler. The human handler was on the network's 14th station staff. There was exactly one of them. She was currently off duty. Her relief did not come on until 1900 hours. I had done the math before I stepped up to the gate. 3 hours and 14 minutes to 1800 hours. 1 hour after that before the relief handler came on. 4 hours and 14 minutes total before the transit hold hit the ground authority's desk. The convoy needed 3 hours and 40 minutes to clear the approach lane and reach the city's secondary freight entrance, where a separate intake team, not locked, not flagged, because the species survey flag was tied to this gate, not to the convoy manifest, could process 314 people on humanitarian transit codes. They cleared with 9 minutes to spare. Because Commanding Officer Wren told me afterward, when she came back to the gate. She told me with the particular economy of someone who has used up all her other words and has only the important ones left. The network survey team arrived at the gate at 1912. They were thorough. They were professional. They took biological samples and recorded physiological data for 6 days before they submitted their classification package to the regional hub. On day 11, the hub returned a verified classification string, 11 digits, 2 separator marks, 1 check character. They pressed it into a new tile and handed it to me. I could not press it to the reader plate. The survey team had to do it for me. The gate opened. I stood there for a while, looking at it. The city was lit up in the afternoon, the way it had been the first day, pale stone catching the sun, the administrative towers throwing long, clear shadows across the apron. I had been outside for 11 days. I had drunk water from the survey team's supply kit and eaten field rations, and slept on the ground beside the gate because they hadn't offered me anything else and I hadn't asked. I have the tile still. I kept both of them, the first one, with the void stamp and the changed check character, and the new one with the full validated string. They sit on my desk at the survey group station office, where I have worked for the past 6 years, one beside the other. People ask me sometimes which one I keep for the memory. I tell them the first one, the one that said entry void, not because it's the one that worked. It didn't work, that was the point. But a blank in the network's record was something no one had ever put there before. And for 4 hours and 14 minutes, that blank was the only space 314 people needed. The network has a classification for everything now. Every species that is ever presented at a Vel'drani gate has a string, a tile, a permanent record. We were the last species that didn't. I think about that sometimes, standing at a gate. How the grid can hold 4 centuries of data and still not know what to do when something new walks up and puts its hand on the reader plate. It had to stop and think. That was enough.